The NRTC 2024 Project Grant Application Technical Assistance Workshop was presented live on Thursday, July 20th. This version includes the participant questions and the NRTC team's answers. The NRTC team's best advice for a successful application is to carefully follow all instructions in the Overview and Guidelines document in Sage and on each application form. Speaking of the NRTC team, we may be reached at nrtc@dca.nj.gov with questions about this presentation or anything else about our program. The topics we'll cover today are SAGE application instructions, objectives and budget category alignment, writing concise objectives, descriptions, methods, and measurable performance measures on the objectives page in SAGE, overview and guidelines, the online SAGE application forms, the project description template, the project information workbook, application review and scoring, and the qualified projects pool. Nonprofit organizations create extensive, detailed revitalization plans for neighborhoods across the state. The nonprofits work with residents, municipalities, local businesses, and other stakeholders to create a plan that will achieve a shared vision. Once that neighborhood plan is approved by DCA, that organization is eligible to apply for annual project grants for the neighborhood. Each fiscal year, successful grant applications are entered into the Qualified Projects Pool, or QPP, which coincides with the business entity application process. Business entities select projects for funding from the QPP through a competitive application process we'll learn more about later in this presentation. Once DCA internal approval processes are complete, businesses with successful applications remit funds to DCA, and in exchange, DCA issues New Jersey state tax credit certificates in the amount of the contributions. Recipients of funds and funding amounts will be made available to contributors as soon as possible. DCA then makes the designated funds available to the nonprofit organizations to carry out their revitalization plans. This year, $15 million in New Jersey state tax credits have been allotted to the program. The serial advances introduced for 2023 will continue this year. We will advance up to 80% of grant funds in increments of up to 20%. Each advance must be expensed within 3 months. Standardized expense documentation must be submitted and approved before subsequent advances are made. 5% of grant funds are reserved until closeout documents have been approved. Currently, there are 34 NRTC neighborhoods across the state, a few more awaiting approval determinations from DCA, and several neighborhoods just beginning to develop revitalization plans for inclusion in our program. The application instructions found in SAGE provide a wealth of information about the mechanics of SAGE. Applicants are urged to review these instructions and refer to them as needed during the application process. In the Overview and Guidelines document, and also in the application instructions, you'll find this page to guide the structure of your funding request. NRTC grants are comprised of 4 possible components or program types. Those are housing, economic development, supportive services, and other neighborhood revitalization, often abbreviated as other. For each component of the application, each activity planned to achieve project objectives will be listed. Each activity will have a corresponding component budget or budget category. These elements will comprise the application budget, which Wendy will talk more about later. The takeaway here is the one-to-one-to-one relationship between the components, activities, and budget. This is where the objectives, what is planned, how it will be done, and by what measures performance will be determined, is entered. The short description should be just that: affordable housing, park improvements, community event, mural, and such. Despite the name, the detailed description doesn't need much detail at all, just enough to give a clear picture of what funds will be used for. Construction costs for rehab of 2 units for resale, or replace playground equipment, install benches, and repaint gazebo. The descriptions are the what of the project. The methods are the how. Hire local micro-enterprise contractor to complete rehab of 2 affordable housing units. Units will be marketed and sold to current neighborhood renters. Performance measures must be measurable. Throughout the grant period, grantees will report on these measures. We recognize that outcomes such as knowledge gained by program participants are important. It is best practice to evaluate various aspects of projects to identify successes and areas of need, and we encourage grantees to do so. For NRTC reporting purposes, we must measure performance quantitatively. The number of housing units or the number of event attendees anticipated, for example. Please do not include references to neighborhood plans in this section or specific addresses if possible, as in, we plan to produce 2 units of affordable housing at 123 Main Street and 456 2nd Avenue to support Neighborhood Plan Outcome 2.1 to address the shortage of affordable housing in the neighborhood. The information entered here will be displayed on the grant agreement. Less is more. Although the character limits are quite high, you do not need to use them all. Avoiding the use of specific addresses in this section could help avoid the hassle of a grant amendment down the line.
The NRTC project application can be found in Sage. Many of the application sections are the same as previous years, so I will briefly go over those sections before we delve into what's new for 2024. The project application organizational information section still includes inputs for agency info, including the board of directors, personnel, and financial information. The development and non-development information are the same as last year as well, but I did want to point out that you should have a separate form for each location or activity. Do not combine them on one form. Read the application instructions carefully for further detailed information. For the timeline, there should be a form for each program component. Personnel should include agency staff that will implement an activity and agency staff that will be involved in the project. This would include management, administration, and staff. Weekly time commitment, years of experience, and resumes should be inputted here as well. The form can be completed multiple times. Partners and consultants should be listed along with time commitments and experience implementing activities. The certification sheets remains much like last year's, except the fidelity bonds will now be uploaded to the attachments page. Please make sure that your resolution is properly signed and sealed, and all other information is supplied per the overview and guidelines. Susan already mentioned the component activity budget relationship, but I thought it worth reiterating that one-to-one-to-one relationship for your applications in Sage. Each activity should have a component and a related budget entry. Administrative personnel should also be separately listed in one budget component. Administrative personnel is limited to 20% of the award amount. If the expenses are directly related to NRTC project activities, please use program personnel. For general administrative expenses, use admin personnel. Partner and consultant costs are not considered administration personnel expenses. The 2024 Project Description Workbook is new for 2024. This workbook will contain much of the data that was previously entered in SAGE. Project description, community development experience, community assets, regional assets, neighborhood involvement, addressing distress, attracting investments, and other sources of funding all have a tab in the workbook. Each section will be scored individually, so it is very important that you complete every tab in this workbook. To make this a little easier, each section in SAGE that has a related spreadsheet now has a certification box that you should not check until you have completed the correlating spreadsheet. The project description section has two parts. Part 1 is the purple tab in the project information workbook. Part 2 contains the project description template, which Susan will talk to you a little more about after we take a look at the spreadsheet. On the project description spreadsheet, you will align each activity with the strategies and outcomes of your neighborhood plan. You should also list the component and measurement count for each activity. If the activity is a micro-enterprise activity, you will indicate that here as well. Remember, a micro-enterprise is defined as a commercial enterprise with 5 or fewer employees, including the owner. It could involve job training and workforce development, as well as strategic economic sectors like clean energy. You'll also get bonus points if a micro-enterprise is included as one of your activities. Now, Susan, before you tell them more about the project description template, what do they have to do in SAGE after completing the spreadsheet?
Check that box, Wendy! And that completes Part 1 of the project description. Part 2 is the completion of the project description template, which was our information session crackerjack surprise, if you recall. The template is available for download from the attachments page in SAGE. The project description template will not be scored, but it is a crucial part of the application. This description will be used to present the project to potential investors through the qualified projects pool process, which we will talk more about a little later. Previous applicants will remember writing a narrative description directly in SAGE that was used to show the connection between the project and the outcomes of the neighborhood plan. That connection is now made in Part 1 of the project description, entered on the spreadsheet. That template should be completed as follows. The project description may be a maximum of 3 pages in length. It should include photos, renderings, or other graphics that will bring your project to life for potential investors. Do not include references such as Neighborhood Plan Strategy 2.1. Remember to write to your audience, which is not NRTC staff. A few tips. In the blue text box, you should replace name of project and name of organization with the name of your project, application, and organization. Also, of course, you'll replace project description here with the description of the project. You will replace name of organization, municipality, and neighborhood in the header with your information. And in this text box, we're going to ask you to please enter your information next to the info already there. Insert the photos, renderings, or other graphics that will help potential investors see the potential in your project. Once completed, upload the project description template to Section D of the attachments page.
The next sheet in the Project Information Workbook is the Community Development Experience yellow tab. This tab will contain completed projects in the last 5 years. They will include both NRTC and non-NRTC projects. And of course, remember to come back to Sage and check the box once it's complete. So let's take a look at what's on the yellow tab. The Community Development Experience tab should contain a listing of your projects involving physical development. You will indicate whether or not it is NRTC funded and the amounts for both NRTC and non-NRTC funds. You will also indicate if performance measures were met, and lastly, there is a year completed field. If you do not have a year completed for your project, then it should not be on this list. The instructions also list numerous other examples of what should not be on this form. The Neighborhood Assets section has 3 parts. I know you're thinking the screen shows part 1 and 2, and that's 2 parts. While that is true, part 1, the Project Information Workbook, has 2 spreadsheets. The red tab is Community Assets, and the orange tab is for Regional Assets. After you have completed these spreadsheets and checked the box, please be sure to upload your Municipal Revitalization Priority file here, just as you did last year. The Community Assets tab should include a listing of all assets that are defunct or no longer operational since your last project application. This tab is for returning applicants only because NRTC will update the community assets list that you supplied in your last project application. After listing the name and address of these assets, you will choose an asset category from the drop-down menu. These will be facilities, such as a college, a community center, a library, and various others. Assets must be located within an NRTC area, except for medical facilities, which can be located within a half a mile. The Regional Assets tab is where you will input both your current and defunct regional assets. For each asset class, you will include the name and address. Similar to the Community Assets tab, a drop-down menu is available here as well. The green instruction box indicates the various assets available to choose. The Neighborhood Involvement green tab will contain the meetings and events that have been held by your organization in the preceding 12 months prior to the 2024 application. And of course, when you complete this tab, surprise, there's a checkbox. The spreadsheet instructions clarify what should and should not be included in your listing of events. So please read this tab carefully. The Addressing Distress is the blue spreadsheet in your workbook. On this tab, you will list activities in your project that address distress in your neighborhoods. NRTC defines distress as high rate of poverty, high rate of employment, or low income level. For each activity, choose one or more ways that your activities addresses this by selecting the corresponding drop-down. And of course, once you have completed this form, you will return to Sage to check the box. The last 2 spreadsheets, gray and pink, are attracting investments and other sources of funds. While attracting investments are for outside funds received for the last 5 years, other sources of funds will detail the funding that you expect to be committed for the current NRTC project. And of course, I'm going to tell you once again to do what? Check the box. And what happens if you do not check the box? Well, you'll get an error message and not be able to submit your application. But most importantly, not completing a section will lead to those points being lost, which can make the difference between a successful application and one that will have to be improved for next year. We also wanted to highlight the attachments page, which has had quite a few changes. 2 maps are now required. Funding commitment letters will still be uploaded to B, but remember letter C is where you will upload your project information workbook, and letter D now has your project description template. Lastly, Your Fidelity bond will be uploaded to letter E. And we will close out the project application section by reminding you to check for errors before you submit your application. Once your applications have been submitted, no changes will be allowed.
Once you've done all the work, followed all instructions, uploaded all documents, and successfully submitted your application, it's time for the NRTC team to spring into action. First, we'll conduct a threshold review. Under Brad's leadership, the NRTC program accommodates grantees whenever possible. This does not apply to threshold review. When it comes to the 60/40 rule and the neighborhood income targets, we will check for and ensure compliance before proceeding with application review. Non-compliance with either would result in a non-starter application. Applications passing threshold review will be thoroughly evaluated by the NRTC review team and scored based on a 100-point system. Complete details of the application rating criteria are found in the Overview and Guidelines document. We do strive to even the playing field for all applicants as best we can. Changes to application scoring for 2024 are efforts in that direction. We have application scoring for 2023 on the left and 2024 on the right. Possible points for most areas will remain the same as they were for the 2023 application. Changes in application scoring appear in hot pink. For 2024, we reduced points in the areas of community assets, housing value trend, and regional assets, and we increased points for readiness to proceed. With sufficient capacity and effective planning, organizations can demonstrate readiness to proceed with activities, but can't really improve scores in the areas where points were reduced. We are using a 100-point scale, but for applications supporting micro-enterprise, as Wendy described earlier, there are 4 possible bonus points. Because I'm certain everyone refrained from distractions during this presentation and will read and follow all instructions precisely as provided, there's probably no need to mention the dreaded penalty points, but I will. In the Overview and Guidelines, we've provided a checklist of all the documents required. Failure to upload required documents will result in 1 penalty point per missing document. If SAGE prevents an application from being submitted, staff will assist at the hefty cost of 5 points. SAGE prevents submission when tasks, namely the annual agency information update and upload of the annual audit, are left unattended. A review of SAGE mechanics in the application instructions could prevent this costly penalty. Applications receiving a minimum evaluative review score of 60 points will be entered into the Qualified Projects Pool, or QPP. The project description template will be posted to the NRTC website in conjunction with the business entity application period. Businesses will select projects to fund and submit applications. We'll process those applications in the order they are received, designating funds until all projects are fully funded or our tax credits are spoken for. This is what makes things interesting. The order projects are listed in on applications and the order the applications are received will determine which projects are funded before the allotted tax credits are gone. Organizations are encouraged to reach out to businesses that may support them and encourage them to apply early. We held an information session for business entities similar to the one many of you attended a few weeks ago for applicants. The recorded version of that presentation includes details about tax credits and the QPP and is available on the NRTC website. Once the funding designations have been approved, tax credit certificates will be issued, funding details will be released, and the grant agreements will be finalized. As we mentioned in the information session, all dates are subject to change. And as you know, some dates have changed. Our updated 2024 project grant timeline. Participant questions and the NRTC team's answers. Question. For the project description page, does the maximum of 3 pages include the photos along with the narrative? Answer. Yes, the images should be inserted into the template. The text should be formatted to wrap around the images. Question. Should the project description document need to explain NRTC and how we got into it, or presume that the readers know NRTC program details and only describe our current year projects? Answer. Business entities that have expressed interest in or contributed to NRTC in the past will receive an email when the QPP is published. The business entity application information will include some program details. The NRTC 2024 Program Information for Business Entities video is posted on the website under the current fiscal year 2024 info. Question. Are our audits due on September 30th? If we do not submit the audit by August 30th, are we penalized? Answer. Audits are due to be uploaded to Sage 9 months after the end of the organization's fiscal year. Only past due audits would prevent an application from being submitted in Sage. If an audit is due in September, it would have no impact on the submission of an application in August. Question. Does the community development experience include both housing and commercial, etc., and only in the NRTC district or anywhere our organization has operated in the past 5 years? Answer. The instructions found on the Community Development Experience tab of the NRTC Project Information Workbook are to include projects involving physical development fully completed in the NRTC neighborhood within 5 years of the application submission date. Question. Are there any updates on the grants that received funds through the SLFRF program in regard to requirements? Answer. NRTC staff will be in touch to advise 2023 applicants of additional requirements related to SLFRF funds, if any. Question. Do you still recommend not copying over last year's application when starting this year's version? Answer. Sage will allow applicants to copy forward a previous application, but doing so will require careful review and editing. The application will not successfully copy forward sections that have significantly changed. Question. Do we get a penalty for asking for assistance? Answer. No. NRTC staff are here to help. Penalty points come into play only if required documents are missing at 1 penalty point per document, or if Sage prevents application submission and NRTC staff has to submit the application. That would result in 5 penalty points. And that concludes the NRTC 2024 Project Grant Application Technical Assistance Workshop. The NRTC team is here to help. Contact us at nrtc@dca.nj.gov with questions or comments about our program.